discuss that in the next class. So, yeah. So I was talking about the free radio by Salman Rushdie, right? So when we talk about Salman Rushdie, we know that most of us know Salman Rushdie through the novel The Satanic Verses, right? Which became so controversial. He was an Indian-born British writer, and he's written a lot of allegorical novels which examine historical as well as philosophical issues. And the characters that he has produced are not very real. They're surreal characters. He's the person who has introduced the concept of magic realism, if you have read about that. Most of his novels, have this kind of very dark kind of humor. You can call it a very melancholic kind of humor. And his prose style is quite melodramatic. So he is basically known for his treatment of sensitive religious political subjects, and that has actually made him such a controversial figure. Now, when you talk about his education, Rushdie was educated at the Rugby School and the University of Cambridge, and he got his postgraduate degree in history in 1968. And after that, he worked in London as in an advertising company. He was a copywriter. His first novel, titled Grimace, was published in 1975. And the famous novel that he is known for, Midnight's Children, which was published in 1981, it's a fable about modern India. And it had kind of very popular success. It was an unexpected critical success, which won him international recognition. In 1983, he published a novel titled Shame, which is based on the contemporary political situation in Pakistan, which was also very popular. But Salman Rushdie, as we know, the controversial figure as we know him, emerged after the publication of his fourth novel, The Satanic Verses. When you read about the Satanic Verses, you understand that some of the adventures in this book depict a character modeled on the Prophet Muhammad, right? And portray both Muhammad and his transcription of Quran in a manner which drew total criticism from the Muslim community leaders in Britain. And they denounced this novel as blasphemous. Right, there were a lot of public demonstrations against this book, which spread to Pakistan in January 1989. This was published in 1988, and I don't know whether you attended the session where we had a webinar on Ayatollah Khomeini, the poems of Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, Ayatollah Khomeini is a spiritual leader of the revolutionary Iran. And as far as we know Ayatollah Khomeini, we know that he was one person who publicly condemned satanic verses, who issued a fatwa against Rushdie. But later on, during the webinar that we had, we learned about how Ayatollah Khomeini is a very good poet, right? He's a writer and a poet. But the reasons why most people know Khomeini is because of the fatwa that was issued against Rushdie, right? There was a reward offered to anyone who would execute Rushdie, and as a result of that, he had to go into hiding. But he was under the protection of the Scotland Yard, and though he tried to kind of occasionally emerge unexpectedly, sometimes in other countries, he was very much compelled to restrict his movements. But in spite of this death threat, Rushdie continued to write. He produced Imaginary Homelands in 1991, which is a collection of essays and criticism. He wrote a children's novel titled Haroun and the Sea of Stories, which was published in 1990. Then the short story collection East West, which was published in 1994. The lesson that is prescribed to you, the free radio, is from this collection, East West, right? The Moore's Last Sigh, that was a novel which was published in 1995. And in 1998, it was almost after 10 years, after the fatwa was declared, the Iranian government announced that it would no longer seek to enforce its fatwa against Rushdie. So in 1998, he could return to public life. And he wrote about his experience in a memoir titled Joseph Anton. Now, Joseph Anton was the alias or the kind of name that he adopted, false identity that he adopted when he was in seclusion. After he returned to public life, he published quite a number of novels. In 1999, he wrote The Ground Beneath Her Feet. In 2001, he published Fury. And in 2005, he published Shalimar the Clown. Now, Shalimar the Clown is an examination of terrorism, which is set primarily in the disputed Kashmir region of the Indian subcontinent, right? Then in 2008, he published The Enchantress of Florence. It is also a fictionalized account of Akbar, the Mughal emperor. In 2010, he published a children's book titled Luca and the Fire of Life, right? See, Luca and the Fire of Life has a main character called Luca, who is I told you about Harun and the Sea of Stories, right, which he had written earlier. Now, Harun was the protagonist of Harun and the Sea of Stories, and Luca is the younger brother, right? So this is a kind of sequel to Harun and the Sea of Stories. Then he wrote another novel titled 2 years, 8 months, and 28 nights. Right, so that is actually basically a kind of mythological novel, you can say, which was published in 2015, and it depicts, or it shows the kind of problems or the anarchy or the chaos that comes out because of he actually portrays a world between humans and the jinn. Like he has this we've heard about the Arabic mythological figures called the jinn. So there is a kind of fabric that separates the world of humans and the world of jinns, and he this novel, that is 2 years, 8 months, and 28 nights, is like the chaos or the anarchy that comes as a result of this tearing of this separation. There's a kind of there's a kind of rent in this fabric that separates the world of humans from that of the mythological figures known as the jinn, right? So this is actually based on there is a Arabic folk tales titled the 1001 Nights, right? So this is also something like that. This is like there are a lot of folklore allusions, and this novel unfurls a tapestry of connecting stories. This celebration of human imagination. That is 2 years, 8 months, and 28 nights. It's modeled on the 1001 Nights, right? So you remember the king who always wanted to hear a story, and every night he would get married, and then at the night after the wife would relate the story, he would kill her. So he wanted people, because once the stories are over, nobody has more stories, like so he kept on killing women. So that is the story, the 1001 Nights. You can read that; it's very interesting. Then there's another novel which was published in 2017 titled The Golden House. Now, in this, Rushdie has explored the immigrant experience in the United States, and he has created a wealthy Indian family that settles in New York City in the early 21st century, and he speaks about their immigrant experience, The Golden House. In 2019, that's the latest one, he published a novel titled Quichotte. Quichotte is based on Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote. I think you must have heard about that Spanish novel of a knight, titled Don Quixote, written by Miguel de Cervantes. And Don Quixote is modeled on the adventures of this kind of this knight. He's an aged old knight, and he sets out on an adventure. He has got his there's a person accompanying him, somebody to help him, named Sancho Panza. So you can read Don Quixote. And his novel, Salman Rushdie's Quichotte, is also based on, it was not based, it's inspired by Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote. Now, when we think about Salman Rushdie, we know him as the winner of the Booker Prize, right, for Midnight's Children, 1981. It won the Booker Prize in 1981. In 1993, it won the Booker of Bookers. In 2008, it won the Best of Bookers. So, it won a lot of prizes, Midnight's Children. It is basically the format or the structure of the novel. The theory that has been used is magic realism. Now, Rushdie was, he was knighted by the British government in 2007. He's known as Sir Salman Rushdie, but that was actually criticized by the Iranian government and the Pakistan's parliament, because as far as they were concerned, he had written something that was so blasphemous, right? And they had even issued a fatwa against him. So that is something basically about Salman Rushdie. You can read up on Salman Rushdie. Now, you have a text that is prescribed for you, which is titled The Free Radio. And The Free Radio is from a short story collection, East West. Now, in the free radio, I have already put up the text for you. You can read it whenever you get time. We'll just go through the basic introduction of the text. Now, in the free radio, the main characters, the main protagonist is it's a rickshaw driver. I don't know whether you've seen cycle rickshaws, but cycle rickshaws very common in northern part of India, right? You know, the rickshaws where you people pedal, right? Or sometimes people pull. So the main character is he's a rickshaw driver. He's a very naive person, right? He's not very smart or anything. He's a kind of very naive, a very credulous kind of person. His name is Ramani. And then you have another woman character. She doesn't have a name in this story. She's just titled The Thief's Widow, right? So we can understand the kind of gender discrimination that this woman does not even have a name. We'll come to that later. The Thief's Widow, and she is older than Ramani by 10 years, and she's got 5 children from her previous marriage. But in this story, she marries Ramani. Then you have a narrator. The narrator is an old teacher who enjoys a very high social status. Now, it's a narrator who is telling the story of Ramani. Ramani is a very young and a good-looking person, and his father when his father died, he inherited the rickshaw, which his father had been peddling or driving, right? Now, the narrator tells us how Ramani was seduced by the thief's widow. He does not even give her a name. He's not happy about this relationship because he says, you know, like in his own words, he says that he says, we feel that nothing good would have happened to him because the boy was an innocent boy, right? And this thief's widow had her claws, you know, dug into his flesh. And he's an innocent, very naive kind of person. He calls him a real donkey's child because he says you're innocent. He was so innocent. Like, you cannot teach such people. Now, the narrator has got a vested interest in according to him, he was protecting Ramani because he knew Ramani's parents. The narrator knew Ramani's parents, and he wanted to save Ramani from the widow's clutches. So that was his interest. He didn't want Ramani to get married to the widow because he had a very bad opinion about the thief's widow. Now, he describes the thief's widow as a very attractive, very sexy, very seductive woman, and very vicious, right? From the very narration, we understand that there was no love lost between the narrator and the thief's widow. He says she's 10 years older than Ramani, and she had 5 children from her previous marriage. And she was very poor because when the thief died, he did not leave any money for her. Now, the narrator tells us how Ramani and the thief's widow met, right? So, you know, the thieves, one day when Ramani was riding his rickshaw into the town, the thief's widow was in the shop. She was buying something. And the narrator, you know, he tries to make us feel, he insinuates that the thief's widow is a prostitute because, you know, he says, see, her husband did not leave her any money, and I don't know where her money comes from. You know, he tells and he narrates that people saw men at night near her shack, right? So, like, that is a kind of insinuation. Like, you know, this woman does not have any money left because her husband has not given her any money, or he has not left her any money when he died. And how is this money coming from? So because when she goes to buy something, she has money with her. So they come to the conclusion that she's a prostitute. And they make up stories that people saw men at night near her shack and all that stuff. So, you know, it's a kind of gender discrimination that we see here. Now, after when Ramani comes into the town, this thief's widow is buying something from a shop, and then they take Ramani's rickshaw. And the narrator tries to tell us, or he's implying that she wanted to prove that she could afford to ride in a rickshaw, even though her children would be hungry. The narrator thinks that it was then that the widow had decided to seduce Ramani, because after this ride together, the thief's widow and Ramani are always seen together in public. And the narrator says, I'm glad that Ramani's mother is dead. Otherwise, you know, his mother would have been heartbroken from shame. Now, the narrator keeps on telling, he's the one who's narrating. So he tells us how Ramani gets into bad company. He starts drinking illegal liquor in the back of the some canteen there, at the back of the shop. He's hiding and drinking liquor. He doesn't want people to see that, but people know that he's into bad company. And the narrator, he makes a lot of friends. And the narrator feels that Ramani's friends are all bad company for him. And he tries to persuade Ramani to stay away from them, but Ramani does not listen to him. Now, the narrator's friends, the narrator tells us that Ramani's friends also wear the armbands of the new youth movement. We'll come to that. Now, what is the new youth movement? I will discuss about that. Now, this is just the synopsis. So, the friends are wearing armbands, right? They have bands on their arms, and which has the symbol of the new youth movement, and the narrator is not happy with them. He disapproves of them. And he says, these kind of people would be involved in all kinds of scuffles and beatings and quarrels, and he's not happy that Ramani is with them, right? Though Ramani hasn't got any armband, the narrator feels that the new acquaintances, the new friends, the new youth movement people would exert a strong influence on him, right? And the new youth, I mean the youth, the new youth movement people, or we call them the armband youths. They always keep on telling Ramani that he's very handsome, he should be a film star and all that stuff. And the narrator feels that they're flattering him to get money out of him so that they can have free drinks and play cards. So they're just trying to flatter him. And the narrator says Ramani does not understand. He's such an innocent person, such a naive person. He's a donkey's child, and he cannot understand what these people are trying to do. They're trying to flatter him by telling him that you're such a handsome fellow. You should try your luck at films and all that stuff. But when they flatter him like that, he falls for the flattery, and he buys drinks for them, buys liquor for them. He gives them money to gamble and all that, right? So narrator says, and this thief's widow, she makes the situation worse. What does she keep on telling Ramani? She keeps on reinforcing Ramani's dreams about becoming a film star, right? And even, narrator says she even flatters Ramani in public. So the narrator says that because I know his parents have got the soft corner for Ramani, and I have a feeling that some kind of disaster is going to befall this young man. Now, the next time, the widow comes to the shop to buy something, the narrator decides to get involved. He says, I have to get involved because I've got some kind of obligation for Ramani's dead parents, right? And the narrator uses his social status to force the widow to talk to him. Now, he tells her, like, you should stop seeing Ramani. You are not going to see him. He's younger than you. He's 10 years younger than you. You've already got 5 children, right? And the widow is not the one person to be cold. And I wouldn't say that this narrator is a kind of a very positive kind of person. See, he treats this woman as dirt. He makes all kinds of insinuations against her without knowing the reality. He doesn't know that she's a prostitute, but he says she's a prostitute. Why? Because she has money to spend. Now, where does that money come from? She can get money through many other means. It doesn't have to be prostitution. But he somehow arrives at the conclusion that she is a prostitute. That is a kind of narrow lens through which he views her. But she is not one person who is going to be talked down, like she doesn't kind of get scared when the narrator tells her or berates her and tells her not to see Ramani. She tells him very clearly without mincing any words. She says, see, Mr. Teacher Sahib, that's how she calls him, Mr. Teacher Sahib retired. Ramani had asked me to marry him, but I said no because, see, she says, I don't want to have any more children. And he's a very young man. He's 10 years younger to me, and he should have his own children. So she tells, you stop telling this to the whole world, and that I am going to get married to Ramani. I'm not going to get married to Ramani. You can go and tell that to the whole world that I'm not going to get married to Ramani, and you can stop this kind of poison that you're emanating. You're spreading poison wherever you go. And the narrator feels very humiliated. Now he decides to take very less interest in Ramani's affairs because he thinks there's nothing more he can do. There are so many other things, interesting things happening in town. Now, we talk there's a scene where you have a white caravan in the health officer or the health department parks a white caravan. What the white caravan is, we will come to know that. Now, this vehicle, the white caravan, is guarded by these armband youths. I told you about them, right? The armband youths. And this white caravan is the place, or it is the location where men are taken and vasectomy is performed on them, or sterilization. Now, this is in the background of the emergency that was declared during Indira Gandhi's tenure as the Prime Minister. We'll come to that, right? Now, that time when the emergency was declared, Sanjay Gandhi, her son, had been forcefully making men undergo sterilization or vasectomy. And he would kind of talk to these naive villagers and tell them the importance of vasectomy. And he would tell them that if you get sterilized, if vasectomy is done, you will be given a transistor radio as a gift from the central government in Delhi. Now, a transistor radio at those times was something very great. And when somebody would tell you that you would receive a transistor radio as gift, definitely they wouldn't understand what is the the problems of vasectomy or anything like that. They would just go in and do it, right? So Ramani also started dreaming about receiving a transistor radio as gift. Now, people there in that village, they were convinced that Ramani was, he was dreaming about this transistor radio, because Ramani had got this desire, desire for fantasies, or he was one person who's always in a fantastical world. He was a young man who lived in a dream world, right? So people think that when he keeps on telling, I'm going to get a transistor radio, people think that he's living in a dream world. And then what happens, contrary to the statement that had been made by the widow that Ramani and she wouldn't get married, Ramani and the widow get married. And the narrator is so angry. Now, the narrator goes to Ramani, and because, he remembers what the widow had told him, right? She had told him that she didn't want any more children. So he immediately gets suspicious, and he goes to Ramani and says, did you go to the caravan? And Ramani says, I did go to the caravan because I'm in love with the widow, and see, she didn't want any more children, so I did sterilization, and I'll get the transistor radio. And this narrator is so angry. The word he uses, he says, my stupid child, idiot child, you have let that woman deprive you of your manhood. See, this is the kind of wrong impression that prevails in society, that if a man undergoes vasectomy or sterilization, vasectomy is it's a kind of small sterilization process by which you have this birth. This is done by men for birth control. Now, the people usually don't do vasectomy because they have this feeling that once you do vasectomy, the manhood they lose their manhood. So this narrator is also under that impression. He tells Ramani, you're such a fool, and you let that woman deprive you of your manhood. He says, see, she wanted to get married to you, but she did not want children. Now, the best thing is she made you undergo vasectomy so that you won't have any children. But see, you're not going to, you'll become impotent. That's what he tells you. You'll become impotent. Now, Ramani is a little more knowledgeable in such things. He says, no, teacher Sahib, it's nothing like that. See, there's no problem in having sex or anything like that, because this vasectomy or sterilization is only something that acts as a birth control. It does not, like, babies won't be produced. And my woman, the woman I love, did not want any more babies. So this is 100% okay. And this is also in national interest. So this is how during the emergency, Sanjay Gandhi and his team made people, they fooled people to believe that undergoing vasectomy was in national interest. And they kind of bribe these poor villagers, illiterate, uneducated villagers, with transistor radios. Now, he says, I'm going to get a free radio. I'm going to get a transistor radio, and it's going to surely arrive shortly as a thank you gift from the government. And the narrator is so upset. He decides not to tell Ramani that the radio scheme was abandoned many years ago, right? So that scheme wasn't there. It's not working anymore. So he feels very bad. He wants to tell Ramani that you won't get the radio. That was something which was promised in the beginning, but nowadays nobody's giving any radios to anyone. Only thing people are using their manhood, but it's not right, because once you undergo vasectomy, it's not necessary. I mean, it's not that you will lose your manhood or anything. You will not become impotent or anything. It's just a birth control measure. Now, the narrator, sees, like, after their marriage, the widow is not seen anymore. Very rarely they see the widow in town. And Ramani, on the other hand, you can see, like the narrator says, he starts working more and more, right? And every time he's riding through the town, he puts his hand up to his ear and mimics the radio broadcast. And the community is almost fooled into thinking that Ramani has the real thing. So Ramani continues to carry an invisible radio. And, but he feels where you can see that he's trained from this feat of imagination, right? And the narrator understands that Ramani had poured into the idea of his radio all his worries and regrets about what he had done. And if the dream were to die, he would be forced to face the full gravity of his crime against his own body. He would understand that the thief's widow had turned him in before she turned him, before she married him, into a thief of a stupid and terrible kind, because she had made him rob himself. That is what the narrator feels. He sees Ramani working day in and day out. It seems Ramani is pouring out his heart and his strength into work, so that he won't be reminded of what he had done against his own body. He wants to forget that the woman whom he loved had made him a thief. How did he become a thief? Because he had robbed him of himself. He kind of mimics this the free radio. He's mimicking the radio broadcast. It's not that he's got any radio, but he's kind of mimicking, right? And again, you can see the White Caravan. It goes from town to town, from village to village, and Ramani waits, hoping that the government officials will bring a radio to his place. But yes, it's in vain. He doesn't get any radio. And then he goes to the caravan with the widow, and Ramani goes into the caravan. There are a lot of sounds of disagreement, and then Ramani, you can see how Ramani is beaten up by these same armband friends who had been with him, who had flattered him. They throw him out of the caravan, right? And he is so disillusioned. So he had see, the reason is he had undergone this vasectomy or this sterilization act. One reason was because he thought he would get the free radio. The second is because the woman whom he loved, did not want any children, right? But later, as reality sinks in, he realizes that he had done a terrible crime against himself, and he becomes so dejected. And especially when he does not get the radio, he becomes more and more dejected, so much so that he decides to go and fight for it. But he is beaten up by his own armband friends, the friends who had been with him, who had flattered him, who had used him to get free drinks and play cards. The same friends beat him up, and that actually makes him so dejected and makes him so unhappy. Right? And then, the narrator tells, how in the end, Ramani sells his rickshaw. And he tells the narrator that he and his family, that is the widow and her 5 children, now they become his children also. They're leaving for Mumbai, because Bombay, right? Because he wants to become a film star. He says, everybody tells me that I have got it in me to become a film star. So I would dream of becoming a film star. And the narrator is a little sad that Ramani is losing, because he doesn't know what's going to happen to Ramani. But after a few months, he receives a letter from Ramani, and the narrator, while reading the letter, he understands that it was not Ramani who had written it. It was dictated by Ramani, but written by a professional letter writer. Why? Because Ramani is not a writer, he can't write. He's illiterate, right? And the narrator keeps on receiving more letters filled with stories from Ramani's new life. Now, according to the letters, Ramani tells him that his talent was discovered at once, and now he lives the excellent life of a rich film star. Now, it's in the end, the narrator is like, he says the letters were very wonderful. They're beautiful letters. They're brimming with confidence. And, whenever he read them, he remembers the expressions that used to come over his face in the days just before he learned the truth about his radio. And he also remembers the mad energy, the huge mad energy Ramani had poured into the act of conjuring reality by an act of magnificent faith. But out of thin air, between his cupped hand and his ear, that is the last line he says, See, he remembers how Ramani had been, pretending that he had the radio, how he would always keep his hand cupped like this against his ear, thinking that he was listening to the radio broadcast, making people believe. He was always living in a world of fantasy, living in a world of dreams, right? It was not true. And even the narrator realizes now that the letters, though they are brimming with confidence, he remembers the expression of Ramani when he was, when he learned the truth about his radio, the dejection on his face, right? He remembers the kind of stress and strain he had undergone, or how much he had poured himself into the act of working. Why? Because he wanted to forget the reality of having injured himself, or having robbed himself, right? And he also, he remembers how Ramani he put up this act, it was a kind of act of magnificent faith, right? He would just put his hand like this against his ear. So it was just a make-believe world. And similarly, the narrator believes that Ramani, even in Bombay or even in Mumbai, like now it's Mumbai, but when this was written, it was Bombay. Even in Bombay, when he talks about being living a life of an excellent, of a rich film star, the narrator finds it a difficult pill to swallow. He knows that it would not be true, because Ramani was one person who was so good at conjuring and making up stories and making up all kinds of fantastical images and all that. He was not a person who would actually live in a kind of real world. He was always living in a surreal world, a world which was not real. So just like he imagined having the radio, here also the narrator was very sure that he would definitely have not got the life of a film star. He would be living a very, as a very hard life, but he would be still living in this world of fantasy. And that is why he writes the letter like that. So that is the story for you. We can discuss discuss more matters about the story, the themes, the analysis of the story in the next class.